Tag TV, and Tag Radio. Technology now has a voice of innovation and information. Get it on www.tagtvonline.com. Automatic routine of behavior that are repeated regularly without thinking. Human behaviors learned, not instinctive without the explicit contemporaneous intention of the person. Habit, the fundamental building block of human behavior, an important part of the definition of the fundamental concept of self. Experts say 95% of human behavior is controlled by the unconscious mind. Habit explains why 80% of new products fail, why billions of advertising dollars are wasted every year, and why even satisfied customers are not loyal. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, July 15, 2008, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. From designing products to creating long-term loyalty, this trek into today's Tech Talk explains how winning the unconscious mind is the key to success in the marketplace, as Tino explores the result of habitual mind's control of behavior with the man who literally wrote the book, Habit, with Dr. Neale Martin, founder and CEO of Ntelec Incorporated, one of the nation's top thought leaders on consumer behavior, customer satisfaction, and bridging the gap between new technologies and the global marketplace. As CEO of Ntelec, a marketing, consulting, and education company, Dr. Martin has provided invaluable and visionary direction to companies in adjusting their strategic marketing in the face of rapid technology change. In the last decade alone, Dr. Neale has consulted with the world's leading communications and networking executives at companies like Sprint, Nextel, Cisco, Nortel, Motorola, and beyond, and has helped in the launch of some of the most innovative products and services leading global markets today. A local respected community leader, Dr. Neale earned his Ph.D. from the College of Management at Georgia's Institute of Technology and headquarters his Ntelec consulting operation from its offices in Marietta, Georgia. Science, technology, psychology, history, and philosophy, all insights into the power of human behavior and unconscious habit. As Tino Tech Talks with visionary thought leader, author, and marketing guru, Dr. Neale Martin.
Neale, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk.
Tino, thanks for having me.
Well, the book Habit, is it, first I guess we should, for our listeners, is it out there yet?
Yes, it was available, I guess, early last week from Amazon and hit the Barnes & Noble bookshelves on Friday and will be showing up at Borders and other bookstores later on this month.
Well, great. It's great to have a local author with a book that promises to be very popular. Is this your first book, and what led you to write the book?
It's not my first book, but all the other books I've written have been pretty focused from a technology perspective into telecommunications and networking with very limited release. This is really the first general, in the bookstore kind of book I've written. What led me to write the book was just watching my daughter one day use her cell phone as she was sitting beside the house phone, and of course, like most parents, are kind of going, that one costs money, the other one's free. But I realized that she had done it so automatically that she wasn't thinking about it. That there was just a thought that she wanted to communicate with a friend, and whether it's text messaging or talking, the hand moves almost involuntarily. And my dissertation had been on customer satisfaction, and I'd spent months and months and years working on doing market research and analyzing all the prior research, and was somewhat dismayed to discover that satisfaction has almost no predictive ability in terms of repeat purchase. So, you start thinking through, well, why doesn't satisfaction really help me understand what my customer is going to do in the future? And then so that little insight that my daughter was doing something so automatically she wasn't thinking about it really led me into this idea. And at first it was just, I was trying to be clever, and I was doing a presentation the next month, and I kind of used it as the theme for it, become your customer's habit, not their choice. And the response to that was really strong. And so when I started doing the research to sort of back up writing an article, or maybe what I thought at that point would be like a short book, and by short book I mean something I could write in 2 or 3 months.
Right.
I actually, spent about 2 years going through, having discovered that there was a tremendous amount of research that had come out of the neurosciences, that had come from cognitive psychology and the cognitive neuroscience, where they're actually able to see what was going on inside the brain using functional magnetic resonance imaging equipment. And the startling fact was that little observation I had about my daughter's cell phone use being somewhat habitual really describes the vast majority of our behavior, that most of what we do unconsciously. And then when you look at what most of how we spend our marketing dollars, we see that most of that is spent on this assumption that people are actually thinking about what they're doing. So when I do customer surveys, when I do satisfaction surveys, what's happening is I'm accessing only one part of the brain, and it's the part of the brain that really doesn't control that much of our real behavior.
So, of course, our technology audience is listening here, and the question on their minds is, what kind of implications does habit-based behavior have on their companies?
Well, that's a great question. And the thing that is really important for us to understand is that most technology is wasted. The vast majority of the technology that we sell into the marketplace never gets used. Just look at your cell phone. Look at your computer, your PC, your laptop. And most of us use a very small fraction of what those devices can do. And a large part of the reason is because they're too complicated. And when we say they're too complicated, the whole point of this is that anything that I use routinely, I've got to be able to use with my habitual mind. Because if I have to think about it, I won't. I was very fortunate for the last year working with Sprint and Samsung on the release of their new Instinct phone. And the Instinct was based on these habit ideas. And the whole concept was everything that was put into the user interface was designed around the ideas, is it habit forming? Is it something that you can use so automatically you don't have to think about it? And the phone has done tremendously well. It won almost all the awards at CTIA this year, has been the fastest selling phone at Best Buy for the last 2 years. I think the best selling phone Sprint's ever had. And I think a large part of that, it's because we put all of what you want to do right at the top, so you're not having to go through layers. And I think that the problem is, and I have 2 fairly large sections in the book that really talk about the design and the development process and how often we have a vision that gets lost as we go through our development silos, and that we really need to think through this idea about how customers are actually going to use these products, and whether it's a website, whether it's a service, whether it's a physical product, whether it's software, and to really reverse a lot of our design process to start thinking through this idea of really designing things for the habitual mind as opposed to what I call the executive mind, which is that self-conscious, self-aware, problem-solving mind that most of us are under the illusion is actually normally in control. But I think you can look at the problem that Vista had in terms of how non-habitual it was, and about how many of the habits that we had developed for years working with XP that we had to break to use Vista. And that's where I think so many engineering companies run into problems, is when they really lose sight of the context that the user is going to be in, and especially, as I say, working with their unconscious part of their brain.
Well, you touched on this already, but so you're recommending that companies rethink how they're marketing, basically, and look more towards the habitual mind. And I think you said at the beginning that, the purchasing, I guess most companies make the assumption that, people are they like something, they're going to buy it again, the satisfaction quotient. But you say that's not always the case.
Well, right, and that's the thing, is it's not that we don't buy the same things over and over again. We do. I mean, and that's the big stumbling block for any competitor coming into a market.
Right, that's the habit.
Right, because it's all about what I call inertia. I mean, if you look in your grocery basket, if you look at how you walk through a store, if you look at you will see that you're making the same decisions, but not necessarily because you're satisfied, but because you've solved that problem. And the thing about the executive mind, for all of the wonderful things it can do, it's very limited. It can only think about one thing consciously at a time. And so it's going to hand off whatever it can to the unconscious mind. And so you may be buying the same toothpaste for 10 years, and you're not thinking to yourself, oh boy, I'm satisfied with this toothpaste. It's, I don't have to think about this decision. I don't want to have to rethink that decision that I made successfully 5 years ago. The same thing goes on if you tried to read all of the information on cereal boxes. There's hundreds and hundreds of cereal boxes on in almost every grocery store. And so what you're doing is you're trying to simplify, and it's that simplification process that makes the brand so important. And it's not that the marketing and a lot of the kind of the upfront winning of the customers that does impact the executive brain isn't important, but it's the understanding that what you're really trying to do is own the behavior. Because pretty soon there are very few things that I think most of us use on a routine basis that would go, oh boy, I just love my dry cleaner, or boy, I just love my grocery store. We do it completely automatically. We don't have to think about it, and that's the real benefit. We don't have to think about it, and that's why we like using them.
So shifting gears a little bit, we're in an election year now, as everyone knows, and you mentioned that the unconscious processes are heavily involved in. So would they be involved with which candidate we vote for, and how would that work then?
Well, and again, it's kind of this idea of, as I was going through and doing a lot of research from a lot of different areas, that the way the mind really works and the way we have thought it works is very different. I mean, most of us kind of think about like a rational decision versus an emotional decision. But the reality is I can't make a good decision without my emotions. My emotions are what's basically labeling things as good or bad. And without that judgment, it's very hard to make a decision. And so when we're evaluating candidates, I think that there's a tremendous amount of confusion about this on both party sides about really understanding the process. So, if you may agree with a candidate's proposals, you may think that they're pretty much aligned well with you or better aligned with you rationally. But if you don't like that candidate, if you don't trust that candidate, if you feel like there's an inconsistency between what they're saying and what their behavior is, then that's probably going to lead you not to vote for them. And that's why so much of the negative advertising works so well. Because if you can control that emotional connection between, the picture of that person and what your reaction is, that's going to be much, much more powerful than the cognitive processes that we come up with. And really this is the big issue. The vast majority of our decisions, whether it's buying an automobile, a house, hiring a consulting company, picking a technology, the rational side of us would say, well, make a list of pros and cons and, put it on a spreadsheet, and that's the way we'll make that decision, thinking that that's a better decision if we take emotion out of it. But and this is what when we look at the, studying how people vote, that they normally make an emotional evaluation and a cognitive evaluation of a candidate. They vote the emotional. And I think the rational person is going to say, and that's what's wrong with the country, is that we're voting the emotion. But I would contend that you can't vote without emotion. You've got to understand how the emotional part of the brain is invaluable to good decision making. And have I think a lot of politicians and a lot of their handlers, maybe tried to manipulate us emotionally, absolutely. But I think if you're aware of why your emotions are important, you're going to be less susceptible to that. But I think if we go back and look at some of the last elections over the last 20 or 30 years, you can see how an iconic moment can sort of totally destroy a candidacy. I think we all remember Dukakis riding in that tank with that big silly helmet on. And as soon as you saw that image, you didn't care what his tax policy was. You didn't care what his health care plan was. It was, this guy just does not look like a president. And that's in a completely emotional, unconscious assessment of the situation that's going to influence everything else that you think about, and obviously how you vote come election day.
Well, we've been talking with Dr. Neale Martin, whose book's just out on the bookshelf. It's called Habit, and sounds like something that all people that are in business and in the technology business certainly look to pick up and read. So, Neale, maybe we'll get you at a TAG Society meeting to speak more on this in the future.
Well, that would be great. And, Tino, thanks again for having me.
Thanks for joining me on Tech Talk.